The family portrait hung above the fireplace, pristine and polished. But I wasn't in it. My face, my presence, my entire existence had been sliced out, as if I'd never belonged to the Harper family at all. At 30, standing in my parents' living room, I felt the sting of betrayal sharper than any knife. It wasn't just a photo. It was a declaration. My parents, Richard and Elaine Harper, had chosen to erase me from their legacy, to rewrite our history without me. The portrait showed my younger brother, Ethan, grinning beside them, the golden child who could do no wrong. I'd come home for Thanksgiving, hoping to mend old wounds. But this was a wound of its own, gaping and raw. I stood there, staring at the frame, my suitcase still by the door, while my mother bustled in the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, but it carried enough weight to make Ethan turn from the couch. He looked guilty, his eyes darting away, but he said nothing. He'd known. He'd let them do it. The story of how we got here wasn't simple. It never is with families. Growing up in this sprawling Virginia home, I was the dreamer, the one who wanted more than the picket fence life my parents idolized. I'd left at 18, chasing a career in journalism, exposing truths in cities far from here. My parents called it rebellion. Ethan, 5 years younger, stayed close, became a lawyer, married a sweet woman named Clara, and gave them the stable, predictable life they craved. I was the outlier, the one who didn't fit their mold. But I hadn't abandoned them. I called, visited when I could, sent gifts for birthdays and holidays. Yet, over the years, their responses grew colder, their invitations fewer. I thought time would soften them, but this portrait was proof it hadn't. They'd chosen Ethan, not just as their favorite, but as their only child. Dinner that night was suffocating. My mother's forced cheer, my father's gruff small talk, Ethan's nervous glance, it all felt like a performance. I pushed mashed potatoes around my plate, the question burning in my throat. Finally, I couldn't hold it back. Why am I not in the portrait? My voice cut through the clinking of silverware. Silence. My mother froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened. Ethan stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. "Sarah," my mother began, her tone placating. It was just easier. The photographer suggested a smaller composition. "And you're so rarely here." "Easier," I interrupted, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and rage. "You cropped me out. Like I don't exist." "It's not like that," my father said, his voice gruff. "You're always off chasing your stories. We didn't think you'd care." Didn't think I'd care. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm your daughter. You don't get to erase me because I don't live in your backyard." Ethan finally spoke, his voice low. "Sarah, it wasn't personal. It's just a picture. Just a picture." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "It's a statement. You all decided I don't belong." The argument spiraled. My mother cried, claiming I was overreacting. My father accused me of abandoning them first. Ethan tried to mediate, but his words felt hollow. Complicit. I left the table, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the crisp November night, my breath visible in the cold air. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The next morning, I woke in a hotel room, my phone buzzing with texts from Ethan. "Come back. Let's talk." I ignored them. Instead, I opened my laptop and started digging. If they wanted to erase me, I'd remind them who I was. As a journalist, I'd spent years uncovering truth's corruption, scandals, lies. Now, I'd turn that lens on my own family. I started with public records, old emails, anything that could explain why they'd pushed me out. What I found wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate. My parents had rewritten their will 2 years ago, leaving everything to Ethan. The house, the savings, the The family business, a small hardware store chain my father had built. I wasn't even mentioned. Not a dime. Not a memory. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were emails between my parents and Ethan, discussing me like I was a problem to be solved. She's too independent. My mother wrote. She doesn't need us. My father added. Ethan's responses were vague, but he never defended me. He'd let them build this narrative. Let them justify cutting me out. I sat back, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about a photo. It was about years of resentment, of them punishing me for choosing my own path. I could have confronted them then, screamed until my voice gave out. But that wouldn't be enough. They needed to feel the weight of what they'd done. I spent the next week in that hotel room, piecing together a plan. I wasn't just Sarah Harper, the daughter they discarded. I was a journalist with a knack for exposing truths, and I'd make them see me, not with tears or arguments, but with something undeniable. I started gathering evidence not just of their actions, but of my life, my contributions, my love for them despite their rejection. By the time I returned to their house, I carried a thick manila envelope. It wasn't just paper, it was a reckoning. I knocked on the door, my heart steady but heavy. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my place. They'd cropped me out, but I'd make sure they couldn't ignore me anymore. The door swung open, and my mother's face lit up with a fragile hope. "Sarah, you came back," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I nodded, clutching the envelope, its weight grounding me as I stepped into the familiar warmth of the house that no longer felt like home. My father was in the living room, reading the paper, his glasses perched on his nose. Ethan sat nearby, scrolling on his phone, his wife Clara beside him, her smile tentative. The portrait still hung above the fireplace, a silent accusation. I didn't sit down. "I have something for you," I said, my voice steady but laced with an edge I couldn't hide. I held out the envelope to my father. He frowned, setting his paper aside, and took it with a grunt. "What's this?" he asked, his tone wary. "Open it," I said, crossing my arms. My mother hovered nearby, her hands twisting together. Ethan's eyes flicked up, his expression unreadable. My father tore open the envelope, pulling out a stack of papers, photographs, and letters. His brow furrowed as he flipped through them. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching. Ethan stood, moving closer, his face paling as he saw what was inside. The first page was a letter I'd written, not to them, but to myself, a reminder of why I was doing this. It detailed every moment I tried to stay connected, every call unanswered, every visit cut short by their excuses. But it wasn't just a letter of grievances. It was a chronicle of my life, the one they'd dismissed. Copies of articles I'd written, exposing corruption in city halls and giving voice to the voiceless. Photos of me at award ceremonies, shaking hands with people who valued my work. Letters from colleagues, mentors, even strangers who'd been touched by my stories. "Why are you doing this?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "Because you forgot me," I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. "You didn't just crop me out of a photo. You cropped me out of your lives." My father's hands shook as he reached the next section, financial records. I'd hired a private investigator, a contact from my journalism days, to dig into the family business. The hardware stores weren't as profitable as they seemed. My father had been funneling money into risky investments, hiding losses from Ethan, who was set to inherit the business. There were emails, too. Ones my investigator had pulled from an old server my father thought was secure. They showed him dismissing my offers to help modernize the business years ago, calling my ideas reckless while he made reckless choices of his own. "Sarah, this is private," my father said, his voice low and dangerous. "You had no right." "No right?" I shot back. "You had no right to erase me, to pretend I was never part of this family." Ethan stepped forward, his face a mix of guilt and defensiveness. "Sarah, you're blowing this out of proportion. We didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to." I turned to him, my voice rising. "You knew about the will. Ethan, you knew they cut me out. And you said nothing. You let them make me the villain." Clara touched Ethan's arm, her eyes pleading with him to say something. But he didn't. The silence was deafening. My mother was crying now, clutching a photo from the envelope one of me as a child, laughing in her arms. "We didn't mean to push you away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know how to keep up with you." "That's not an excuse," I said, my throat tight. "You didn't try?" The envelope wasn't just a weapon. It was a mirror, forcing them to see what they'd done. But there was one more piece, one I hadn't planned to reveal so soon. I reached into my bag and pulled out a smaller envelope, handing it to my mother. "This is for you," I said softly. "Read it later. Alone." She took it, her hands trembling, and nodded. My father stared at the papers in his lap, his face a mask of shame and anger. Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. Clara's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something like respect there. I didn't stay. I turned and walked out, the weight of the envelope no longer mine to carry. The crisp air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in years, I felt free not from them, but from the need to prove I belonged. The hotel room felt smaller that night, the walls closing in as I replayed the confrontation in my head. I'd expected to feel triumphant, but instead, there was a hollow ache in my chest. I'd exposed their truths, but at what cost? My phone buzzed Ethan again, begging me to come back and talk. I turned it off. I needed space to think, to decide what came next. The smaller envelope I'd given my mother contained a letter, one I'd written in the quiet hours of the night. It wasn't angry or accusatory. It was a plea, a raw outpouring of the love I still had for them. Despite everything, I'd written about the memories we'd shared, the summer picnics, the late-night talks when I was a teenager, the way my mother used to braid my hair. I told her I didn't want to lose them, but I couldn't keep begging for a place in their lives. I'd left it up to her to decide what happened next. Days passed, and I stayed in town, working remotely from a coffee shop, my laptop open to emails from my editor. I was covering a local corruption scandal, but my heart wasn't in it. My thoughts kept drifting to that envelope, wondering if my mother had read it, if it had changed anything. I didn't expect miracles, but I hoped for something. On the 5th day, Clara called. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Sarah, can we meet? Just you and me." We met at a park, the November wind rustling the leaves. Clara was bundled in a scarf, her eyes warm but worried. "Ethan's a mess," she said, sitting on a bench beside me. "He didn't know how bad it was, how much they'd hurt you. He feels awful." "He should," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "He stood by while they erased me." Clara nodded, her hands clasped tightly. "He's not perfect, Sarah, but he loves you. He's just caught in the middle." I looked at her, this woman who'd married into my fractured family. "Why are you here, Clara?" "Because I see you," she said simply. "I see what you've done, what you've built, and I think your parents are starting to see it too." She told me my mother had read the letter and hadn't stopped crying since. My father, stubborn as ever, was grappling with the financial records I'd uncovered. They'd called a family meeting without me to discuss the will, the business, everything. Clara had been there, listening as Ethan argued for me, finally standing up to our parents. "He said you deserve better," Clara said. "He told them they were wrong to cut you out." I wanted to believe her, but trust was hard to come by. Still, her words planted a seed of hope, one I wasn't ready to acknowledge. We parted with a hug, and I promised to think about coming back. That night, I dug deeper into the family business. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. My father's investments weren't just risky, they were borderline fraudulent. He'd been hiding losses from creditors. From Ethan. Even from my mother. I could have gone public with it. Ruined him. But that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted them to face me. Not a headline. I started drafting a proposal. Not for revenge. But for redemption. I outlined a plan to save the business, modernizing the stores. Streamlining operations. Using my media contacts to rebuild the brand. It was a long shot. But it was something I could offer. A way to show I still cared. Even if they didn't. By the end of the week, I got a text from my mother. Please come home. We need to talk. My heart raced. But I didn't reply right away. I needed to be ready. Not just for them, but for myself. I spent the night preparing. Not just the proposal, but my heart. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't let them define me anymore. The Harper house loomed before me. Its familiar red brick and white shutters hiding the tension within. I clutched my laptop bag, the proposal inside, and knocked. My mother opened the door. Her eyes red-rimmed, but soft. She pulled me into a hug. And for a moment, I let myself lean into it. The warmth of her arms a fleeting reminder of better days. Inside, my father sat at the dining table. The envelope's contents spread out before him. Ethan stood by the window, his hands in his pockets. And Clara gave me an encouraging nod. The portrait still hung, but it felt less like a taunt now. More like a relic of a mistake they couldn't undo. Sarah, my mother began, her voice shaky. We read your letter. We're so sorry. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. My father cleared his throat, his face a mix of pride and discomfort. You went through a lot of trouble to dig this up, he said, gesturing to the financial records. Why? Because you're my family, I said, my voice steady. Even if you don't act like it. The words hung in the air, heavy but true. I opened my laptop and pulled out the printed proposal, sliding it across the table. This is how we can save the business, I said. It's not perfect, but it's a start. My father skimmed the pages, his expression unreadable. Ethan leaned over, reading silently, his brow furrowing. My mother reached for my hand, squeezing it. We didn't realize how much you'd done, she said. Your articles, your awards. We were wrong to think you didn't care. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I always cared. You just didn't see it. The conversation that followed was raw, painful, but necessary. My father admitted to his financial missteps, his pride blinding him to my offers of help. My mother confessed she'd felt abandoned when I left, projecting her own fears onto me. Ethan apologized, his voice breaking as he admitted he'd been too weak to challenge our parents' narrative. I didn't know how to fix it, he said, his eyes meeting mine. I should have tried harder. Clara's presence kept things grounded, her quiet strength a reminder that this family could be more than its fractures. We talked for hours, peeling back layers of resentment and misunderstanding. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, there were still wounds. Still trust to rebuild, but it was a start. By the time I left, my father had agreed to consider the proposal. My mother promised to call, not just for holidays, but to talk. Ethan hugged me, a real hug, not the awkward half embrace of before. I drove back to the hotel with a lightness I hadn't felt in years, but also a wariness. Words were easy, actions were harder. The next day, I got a call from my editor. The corruption story I'd been working on was gaining traction, and they needed me back in D.C. I packed my bags, but before I left, I stopped by the house one last time. The portrait was still there, but my mother had taped a photo of me to the frame, a small, tentative gesture. I smiled, but I didn't stay long. I had a life to live, and it wasn't defined by that picture. Back in D.C., the city's pulse pulled me back into my work. The corruption story broke wide open, landing me on national news. My face on screens my parents couldn't ignore. I got texts from Ethan, proud and a little awestruck. and a hesitant voicemail from my mother, saying she'd seen me on TV. "We're so proud. Sarah," she said, her voice cracking. I listened to it 3 times, torn between hope and skepticism. I threw myself into work, but the family drama lingered like a bruise. My father called a week later, his tone gruff but earnest. "Your proposal, it's good," he said. "We're meeting with a consultant tomorrow. Can you join us? On a call, at least." I agreed, surprised by the flicker of warmth in my chest. The call was tense but productive. My father listened as I explained the plan: digital marketing, new suppliers, a rebrand. Ethan chimed in with legal insights. And for the first time, we felt like a team. The consultant was impressed. And by the end, my father agreed to move forward with my ideas. But trust is a fragile thing. Weeks later, I got an email from Ethan. The will had been revised. Me name was back in. An equal share with him. It wasn't about the money. It was about the acknowledgement. I cried, not out of joy, but relief. They'd seen me. Finally, I visited for Christmas, bracing for awkwardness. The portrait was gone, replaced by a new one: me, Ethan, our parents, even Clara, all together. It wasn't perfect. The smiles were a little forced, the wounds still fresh. But it was a start. My mother hugged me longer than usual, whispering, "We're trying, Sarah." My father clapped my shoulder, his way of saying he was sorry. Ethan and I took a walk that night, the snow crunching under our boots. "I was wrong," he said, his breath visible in the cold. "I should have fought for you sooner." "I know," I said, but I smiled. "You're here now?" We talked about the future as dreams. Mine. The family we could still be. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Clara joined us, her laughter breaking the tension. And for a moment, I felt like I belonged again. Back in D.C. I kept working, but I made time for calls, for visits. My parents started asking about my life. Not just my job, but me. It was slow, sometimes painful, but it was progress. The envelope had been my weapon, but it was also my bridge, leading us back to each other. The business turnaround was slow but steady. My father, stubborn as he was, followed through on the plan. And by spring, the stores were showing signs of recovery. I flew back to Virginia for a meeting, not as a daughter begging for approval, but as a partner. It felt strange, sitting across from my father as an equal, but it was a role I'd earned. My mother had changed the most. She called weekly, asking about my life, my friends, even my dating prospects with a shy curiosity. She sent me a care package once, filled with homemade cookies and a note that read, "We're proud of you. Always." I kept that note on my desk, a reminder that love could be rebuilt, even if it took time. Ethan and I grew closer, too. He opened up about the pressure of being the perfect child, the weight of our parents' expectations. I realized he'd been trapped in his own way, caught between loyalty to them and love for me. We started a tradition: Sunday calls, just the two of us, talking about everything and nothing. Clara became my unexpected ally. She invited me to her book club, introduced me to her friends, made me feel like part of something again. One night, over wine, she admitted she'd pushed Ethan to confront our parents. "I saw how much you were hurting," she said. I couldn't stay quiet. The new portrait hung in the living room, a symbol of our fragile truce. But symbols weren't enough. We had to keep working, keep talking, keep choosing each other. There were setbacks, arguments, old habits resurfacing, but we faced them together. One day, my father called me out of the blue. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I was wrong. About a lot. I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough." I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to. The business thrived, and so did we, in our messy, imperfect way. I kept writing, exposing truths, But now I wrote for myself, too. For the girl who'd been cropped out but never stopped fighting to be seen. A year later, I stood in my parents' backyard, the summer sun warm on my face. The family was gathered for a barbecue, Ethan grilling, Clara chasing their new puppy, my mother fussing over a salad, my father laughing at something Ethan said. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The portrait hung inside, a reminder of how far we'd come. My parents had started therapy, at Clara's suggestion, and I joined a few sessions. We talked about the hard things me childhood, their expectations, the years we'd lost. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. I'd published a book, a memoir about family, betrayal, and redemption. It wasn't just about us. It was about every family that fractures and finds its way back. My parents read it, and though it was hard for them, they told me they were proud. Ethan bought 10 copies, handing them out to his friends with a grin. That day, as we sat around the table, my mother raised a glass. To Sarah, she said, her voice steady, for reminding us what family means. I blinked back tears, raising my glass with them. The envelope had been a turning point. But this moment, this messy, beautiful family was the real victory. I wasn't just in the portrait now. I was in their hearts, and they were in mine. As the sun set, I looked at them, my family, flawed and human, and felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. We'd been broken, but we'd chosen to heal. And that was enough.